All right, guys, we're going to start on Unit 7. We're going to talk about evolution, specifically Darwin and his ideas around natural selection. So, Charles Darwin is known as the father of evolution. So, pretty much the things that he did were quite revolutionary. And we're going to start with a bit of a background on who Darwin is and what his theory really has come to be. And so let's watch this video first. Don't skip the video. And then we'll come back to take some notes.
Charles Darwin was a famous scientist in the 1800s. He was famous because he came up with an idea that changed the way we think about life on Earth forever: the theory of evolution. Darwin loved animals and studied them all of his life. In 1831, he went on an exciting voyage aboard the ship HMS Beagle. The Beagle visited the coast and islands of South America and Australia, where Darwin observed and collected a wide range of weird and wonderful plants and animals. When he got back to England, he analysed his collection closely. That was when his ideas about evolution started to form. Darwin had found around 15 different species of finch when he was on the Galapagos Islands. He noticed that the birds were similar to other finches in lots of ways, but their beaks were all different shapes. Darwin looked into it further. He realised that the different beaks matched the type of food available on each island. The finches who ate insects had skinny, pointed beaks, so they could pick them up better. And those that ate hard fruits had beaks that were sharp, so they could get through the skin. Darwin decided that there was only one way that this could have happened. The birds must have adapted to their environment over time. This led into another idea, which he called the survival of the fittest. In any environment, plants and animals from the same species show natural variation in their physical characteristics, such as neck length in giraffes. Darwin suggested that those plants and animals best suited to their environment are more likely to survive and pass on their characteristics to their offspring. Over a long period of time, the characteristics of the surviving members of the species will come to predominate. Confused? Take the peppered moth. In London in the early 1800s, 98% of peppered moths had light-coloured bodies. Only 2% were dark. The light moths were very happy because they were the same colour as the trees, which meant that they could easily hide from hungry birds. The dark-peppered moths were easy to see and, well, eat. Then came the factories and the smoke of the Industrial Revolution. Many trees turned black with soot, and suddenly it was the dark moths who were able to survive better in their environment. By 1895, the dark-peppered moths made up 95% of the population. That's quite a turnaround. The process of natural selection usually takes much longer, but this is a good example of how it works. What about us humans? Good question. Darwin went on to suggest that humans share a common ancestor with modern apes. This was controversial because it went against the religious beliefs of many people. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection had a great impact on the world. Today, it is widely accepted as our best scientific explanation of how life on Earth works.
Okay, so a couple of things you can see. Darwin really developed his ideas, his theories when he was traveling around the world, and he was visiting lots of different places. This video specifically talked about Darwin's finches. If you've heard of Darwin and his tortoises on the Galapagos Island, he was a naturalist, which means that he observed nature and really just kind of recorded his observations and put it all together as he was kind of venturing around on this big giant ship, the HMS Beagle. And so let's talk about what Darwin called descent with modification. this is what he initially coined, what we would now call natural selection. So Darwin proposed this idea that organisms evolve by descent with modification. And he published that in his book, which is called On the Origin of Species. So, again, this is what we would call present day natural selection, when nature selects organisms that have traits that are beneficial. And those organisms then get to live, they survive, they live, and importantly, they reproduce. And so part of his idea here that he developed is that change occurs slowly over time due to what are called environmental selection pressures. So the environment is putting pressure on basically the success of the organism, the survival of the organism, like we saw in this video. So the example that the video gave you of the peppered moth is kind of a classic example of natural selection that's referenced often. We'll see a couple of other examples as we move forward, but there's that picture of the peppered moths. So Darwin's theory, right? Natural selection, we're going to hit a couple of highlights. What is it? Natural selection, Darwin would say, is a process where the organisms that are better adapted to their environment are selected for, which means they are allowed to survive and reproduce. And so their genes and the beneficial traits that exist within their genome are passed down to the next generation. And so by nature selecting, we can, over long periods of time, experience evolution, changes in the population. This video right here really talks a little bit about Darwin again. So you'll catch like a recap and you'll see his journey, his voyage that he traveled around the world on the ship, kind of the path that he took. But it digs into specifically the process of natural selection a little bit more. So let's check this out.
What are Darwin's finches, and why are they so important to biologists? The study of finches led to the development of one of the most important scientific theories of all time. But how did this come about? In December 1831, a naturalist called Charles Darwin boarded the HMS Beagle, bound on a surveying voyage to South America. Whilst the ship and crew carried out coastline surveys, Darwin was free to explore the islands en route. In 1835, the Beagle arrived at the Galapagos Islands near Ecuador. What Darwin found there surprised him greatly. As well as giant tortoises and marine iguanas, Darwin collected and preserved a variety of different songbirds called finches. Upon returning to the UK, he examined them together with ornithologist John Gould and made some fascinating discoveries. The scientists observed that the birds were all similar to a single type of finch found on mainland South America, suggesting that these mainland finches had originally colonized the island. However, the Galapagos finches were all slightly different from the original mainland species, and they were also different from each other. The finches on each island showed distinct variations in their overall size, beak shape, and claw size. These differences were attributed to the differing food sources available on the various islands of the Galapagos. Some of the birds had long, thin beaks and sharp claws suited to catching and eating insects, while others had large, powerful beaks suitable for cracking open nuts. Because of the distances between the islands, breeding between different species of finch was unlikely, and Darwin concluded that the finches must have evolved over time from the original mainland species to suit the conditions found on each individual island. In all, 13 of the birds brought back by Darwin were identified as being entirely new species, all similar to each other, but with definite variations from their common ancestor. Darwin proposed that the variations seen both within and between the finch species arose by chance. Variations which gave any individual a competitive advantage made them more likely to survive and therefore reproduce, outcompeting those with less advantageous characteristics. Darwin called this theory natural selection, and he published it in his book On the Origin of Species in 1859. Evolution by natural selection is now widely agreed to be the most accurate theory to explain the origin and diversity of all life on Earth. In this video, you have learned how the finches of the Galapagos Islands led to the development of the theory of evolution by natural selection. Is evolution of these birds still happening? See what you can find out.
Okay, so the idea here, kind of the big thing to grasp, is that natural selection as a theory is really Darwin's baby, and it is the primary mechanism or way in which evolution, changes in a population, occur. It's widely accepted. There are a few other mechanisms for evolution, but natural selection is the primary. And so, even in kind of looking at his results on the finches, the idea here is that the finches were unique on their different little islands because of their food sources and the habitats that they lived in. So they were adapted, better adapted to their environment. And so we saw traits like thin beaks on the islands where the primary food source were insects. We saw very thick, powerful beaks on the islands where large seeds and nuts were the primary food source. So the organisms are adapted to their environment over a long period of time. And those adaptations really increase in the population because they are advantageous. Like, it is beneficial for survival to have those particular traits or characteristics. Looking at the next section of our notes, in order for natural selection to actually occur, so in order for nature to select organisms, there are a couple of things that must be present in a population. The first thing is that there already has to be some variation within the population. And usually those variations are due to mutations that exist within the population. Natural selection doesn't work if all of the organisms are identical, genotypically identical, and also phenotypically identical. So you have to have differences for the environment to act upon. So variation must exist in a population. In this first picture, we have snails with various shell colors. The next factor that has to be present for natural selection to occur is competition. And so competition must exist within the population, and usually that competition is due to limited resources and something called an overproduction of offspring, which basically summed up means there are more individuals in the population than there are resources to support them. And so now you create some competition within organisms, and some will be better at accessing the resources and some will not be good at accessing the resources, which leads to the third thing that must exist, which is some people will survive and reproduce and others will not. Some organisms, those that found access to the resources because of beneficial traits, they will survive and reproduce, add their genes into the next generation. Those that couldn't access the resources will die and most likely not reproduce. So this differential survival and reproduction, that means that not everybody survives and reproduces. Some do, some don't. So if we follow the progression of our snails, it looks like having a gray shell is somehow beneficial. And so we start to see gray shell numbers increasing in the population, ultimately until we see even lighter gray shells or white shells in the population. So we experience a complete shift from mostly dark shells to mostly white shells, probably because something in the environment changed that made the lighter shells more beneficial. The idea of kind of survival of the fittest comes from this third factor that must be present, the differential survival and reproduction. That's from the idea that those that are best suited will survive and ultimately reproduce or pass their genes on. Now, after selection has occurred, we could talk about what the population is going to look like. And so I have these three pictures right here. What I need for you to recognize in any one of these, and I'll just choose this bottom one for a second is that the dashed line on all of these graphs represent what the original, in this case, beetle color population was. And then the solid line represents what the new population looks like after natural selection has occurred. And so this x-axis right here is a color spectrum for beetles. So that's kind of what we're looking at. That's the trait that we're looking at in these graphs. What color are the beetles from a really light green to a really dark green? And just sticking with this example down here at the bottom, you could see that the original population, there were the majority of the beetles were sort of right here in the middle of this color spectrum. So y-axis represents the number of beetles. When the graph goes up, that's a lot of beetles right here at this middle color. Now, something happens, natural selection occurs, and the new population after selection then is the solid line, which in this case shows even more of this intermediate color in the overall population. So these three, they're called selection curves, are basically the result of after natural selection has occurred, what does the population look like? And so we'll start at the top with directional selection. In directional selection, here's your original, and then natural selection occurs, and here's your new population. So we have shifted in one direction towards this, in this case, dark green beetle color in directional selection. So a population will shift to a new phenotype after the selection has occurred. That's what we see up here in this top graph when they all shift, not all, but the majority of them shift towards the dark green beetle. It's also exactly what happened in the peppered moth scenario, where most of the moths were kind of this white color, and natural selection occurs and that phenotype shifts to the dark moth. It became more advantageous to be the dark moth because of the sort of pollutants on the trees from the factories in the Industrial Revolution. And we saw a directional shift towards the black phenotype in the peppered moths. So directional selection means the new population shifts either this way, or it just as easily could have shifted this way towards the light green beetle. The next one we see is called disruptive selection. So dashed line is the original population, solid line is what happens after. So in this case, you have a whole bunch of intermediates initially, and something occurs and that intermediate population declines. And we see the two extremes, the light green and the dark green peak. So the population splits into two phenotypes after the selection process. Another good example of this would be like if there were a variety of beak sizes in a bird population, and maybe the small beaks were really good at accessing small seeds, and the large beaks were good at crushing the large seeds, but the intermediate beaks were kind of not good at either. So we would see a decline in that middle-sized beak and a rise in the small and the large beaks because, again, those traits provided a selective advantage. The last one is stabilizing selection, and that's where we see the population spikes at the intermediate. And a great example of this is how birth weight has sort of stabilized in the US around 7.5 pounds. So if you think about that, babies that are really small have health problems, and babies that are really big are hard to birth. And so we see birth weight has sort of stabilized around this kind of relatively healthy, but still able to be birthed weight around 7.5 to 8 pounds. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is this process of natural selection still happening today. Sometimes we think that evolution is just something that happened in the past, but actually taking a look at antibiotic resistance allows us to see that it is still happening today, and it's actually a bit of an issue. So let's look at this picture down here for just a second before the notes actually pop up on the screen. So in stage 1, let's notice we have all these little bacterial cells, and there's variation in the population. There are blue, there are orange, there are some that are big, there are some that are small. So there's already a bit of a variation that exists within the population. And then this population is hit with antibiotics. So flash forward to circle 2. So in circle 2, the antibiotics killed most of the bacteria, except for those orange bacteria that had resistance. They had established resistance to whatever the antibiotic was, probably by picking up a plasmid or by a plasmid being inserted from a fellow bacterium. So whatever the reason, the orange bacteria were able to resist the antibiotics. So now all the blues are gone, and the only thing that is left and now able to reproduce are the bacteria that are resistant. So they do that. They reproduce, and we get circle 3. And circle 3 shows us that we end up now with a colony of primarily resistant bacteria. And so if you tried to target circle 3 with antibiotics again, the antibiotics would not do anything to stop or slow the growth of those bacterial cells. So we can see antibiotic resistance as really natural selection being applied pretty quickly in a lab. We definitely still see it present today, but we could see it happen in a lab in not too much time. And I'll show you a video of that in just a second. So here are the notes that kind of represent what we just talked about. In this initial circle, we have bacteria that have either picked up a plasmid or they have developed a mutation to show genetic variation within their population. And that variation is that some bacteria are resistant to antibiotics and others are not. So when antibiotics are exposed, or when the bacteria are exposed to the antibiotics, some survive. Those that are resistant will survive and they will reproduce. And now we have colonies of resistant bacteria. That's the process of natural selection. There was variation that existed. There was a selection pressure, the antibiotic, that was applied. Some survived and some didn't. And the survivors get to go forward and pass their genes on to the next generation and the next generation as they reproduce. So this idea of antibiotic resistance is a great example of not just evolution, but of the process of natural selection. Now, there was a lab at Harvard that wanted to model how quickly bacteria could resist antibiotics, how quickly they would learn, and how quickly entire populations would shift from sort of a mix with lots of variation to a population where pretty much everybody is the same and they're all resistant. So let's check out this super quick little video and you can watch it as it happens.
So what we ended up building was basically a petri dish, except that it's 2 feet by 4 feet. And the way we set it up is that there are 9 bands, and at the base of each of these bands, we put a normal petri dish thick agar with different amounts of antibiotic. On the outside, there's no antibiotic. Just in from that, there's barely more than the E. coli can survive. Inside of that, there's 10 times as much, 100 times, and then finally the middle band has 1,000 times as much antibiotic. And then across the top of it, pour some thin agar that bacteria can move around in. The background is black because there's ink in it, and the bacteria appear as white. First, you see they spread in the area where there's no antibiotic, up until the point they can no longer survive. Then a mutant appears on the right. It's resistant to the antibiotic, it spreads, until it starts to compete with other mutants around it. When these mutants hit the next boundary, they too have to pause and develop new mutations to make it into 10 times as much antibiotic. And then you see the different mutants repeat this at 100. And after about 11 days, they finally make it into 1,000 times as much antibiotic as the wild type can survive. And so we can see by this process of accumulating successive mutations that bacteria, which are normally sensitive to an antibiotic, can evolve resistance to extremely high concentrations in a short period of time.
Okay, so that is pretty impressive. You might be watching this going, yeah, okay, looks good. These sides right here and right here, there was no bacteria, or there was no antibiotic in those, in that agar. And so there's lots of growth. But as it approached this boundary, this next section had antibiotic in it. And same thing for over here. And so what you saw, if I kind of back it up, you saw this moment where natural selection occurs. And it's right here where this mutant, right? So that has now, nature has selected for all of these bacteria. And so they get to continue to live and grow and survive. And as they push up against the next boundary where there's even more antibiotics, you see natural selection occur in all of these spots where we're pushing out into the next zone, all the way until you get to the middle. So the entire video was less than 2 weeks long, and you, by the end of it, end up with some highly resistant bacterial cells, which is not good if those bacterial cells are pathogenic. If they would make you sick, we would not have medication to treat those. So antibiotic resistance very much is a thing that is happening, and shows us natural selection and evolution. Here's the last thing that I would say. This is a very large conversation about why is antibiotic resistance spreading right now. And the short conversation is because we continue to show the bacteria what our antibiotics look like. We are constantly exposing, sort of throwing antibiotics at ourselves. So that's the world of medicine. We prescribe more antibiotics today than ever before, for things that probably don't need an antibiotic. And every time every time somebody takes an antibiotic, you are essentially showing the bacteria that live in you and on you what that drug looks like, and encouraging the opportunity for resistance, particularly if you don't finish out your medications as prescribed. We can come back to that in class, but that is a super big, important concept. The lesser known thing is how much antibiotics are used in our food industry. And so we can talk about that a little bit more in class, particularly when animals, meat, egg producers, chickens, cows, are grown in these big factory farms. These animals are living on top of each other, and to prevent diseases in the animal population, they're given pretty massive amounts of antibiotics as a preventative, so that they don't get sick when they're crowded into these spaces. So we use a ton of antibiotics in our food industry. And those are, again, opportunities to show the bacteria what our drugs look like, so they can learn them and they can resist them. So we are very much, even though bacteria do what bacteria do, that's how they've stayed around for so long, we very much have a role in this idea of antibiotic resistance. Okay, you are done with this section of notes, and you can come on back tomorrow for the next section.